Despite what we used to think, the hearing injuries among interpreters actually do not stem from Zoom, as we were thinking, but it's rather the fact that we're trying to speak at the same time here in committee. So today I will not go back and do the whole thing, but we have the standing order, and it's on page 58, and I quote: in case of this order, the chair can suspend the meeting until order is reinstated, or the chair can also adjourn the meeting if it is such that the committee cannot resume its activities. So this would be a serious thing to take into account. If we don't have interpreters at Parliament, Parliament cannot work, so this is what's causing the injuries. I'm seeing your hand, Mr. Dalton. Mr. Beaulieu will go first, and please just wait a second that I have the chance to open the meeting officially. So just to remind that this is serious, we have our clerk and myself. We're looking at the hands up on the screen. I'm not seeing Miss Ashton right now. I don't know if she's with us, but I know that she has done her audio test. So if there's a point of order, just say point of order and then don't keep talking. Just wait for me to recognize you. And we will let the person finish their sentence, and then we will come back on your point of order. And please do not turn on your microphones. And we have our technician here also who will try to do his best. And we're trying to minimize the injuries, hearing injuries caused to our interpreters. So we're here due to a standing order 106.4 situation. Just a second. Mr. Beaulieu will go first. Okay, Mr. Beaulieu, and then Mr. Godin. Before you, we have Mr. Beaulieu. The two of us here, we're trying to do work, so please put your hand up. Unless there's a point of order, yes, I understand you have to say point of order, but please, when you do that, wait for the person who's speaking to finish their sentence, and then I will give the floor to you. Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure that we are on the same page as far as the procedure is concerned. So how would I know that you put my name in the list? Well, have faith, have confidence in the chair and in the clerk, or you can do a point of order. But, Mr. Godin, I haven't missed many hands up so far. So Ms. Ashton's sound test has been done. I'm not seeing you on the screen, but if you put your hand up, you can use the hand up function. Ms. Ashton, for once, you're with us in regular committee hours for you, at least, from Manitoba. So we're going to Mr. Beaulieu first, and then Mr. Dalton, and so go ahead, Mr. Beaulieu. I'd like to move a motion, which is included in 106.4. Everyone here has it in both official languages, and it reads, given the unacceptable words of the MP for Glengarry Prescott Russell vis-a-vis a witness defending a French language, it is resolved at the committee the whip of the Liberal Party withdraw the MP in question from the Standing Committee on Official Languages, and B, MP Francis Drouin resigns from the presidency of the Assemblée Parlementaire de la Francophonie. So, Mr. Beaulieu, for everyone to be able to follow, I think it is what the piece you read is just A and B from a previous motion. Is that the case? Is that a point of order? Yes. That's not what he said. He started with, given the comments. That is part of the motion.
Parfait.
Okay, so on the motion, Can I explain the motion? Please go ahead. Yes. I think it is important to proceed because it is serious. Treating witnesses of being full of shit and then being extremists. So that was a very aggressive tone when Mr. Lacroix was saying, well, is this parliamentary language? And then he was saying that he was out of his patience. I think it amounted to intimidating the witness. And what I find a shame is that there was an initial refusal to apologize, and then apologies, just paying lip service, and then saying that, well, if they want my apology, they can call me and then ask for it. And then we saw apologies issued to the witnesses here. But I think that it's an insult to all who defend these positions and who are asking for sustainable financing for French language CEGEPs and other educational institutions and those outside Quebec. So there's no reason to be so aggressive. He was very nuanced in his remarks. He was saying that this is one of the factors, and that's not what Mr. Drouin focused on. He was saying McGill and other similar institutions were the reason for the anglicization, which is not what the witness was saying. So it's also a shame that it was defended later on by many Liberal MPs. During the last meeting, we had Mr. Serre, who said that it was a small sin. It was just the separatists who felt insulted by that. So I think it added insult to injury, that it was simplistic. The Minister of Official Languages was saying, look, researchers present statistical data, and he was saying that he went to a French university in Alberta. But of course, there's an underfunding of post-secondary education institutions in Alberta, as is the case everywhere in Canada. Of course, that is not going to francisize Alberta, but if there was a fair level of funding, it would help here in Ontario as well. So there was a reference to separatists, but the reaction in Quebec was pretty much unanimous. Even the reaction coming from people who are not in favor of Quebec's independence. You have Quebec's Premier François Legault, who said that that was completely irrespectful. Mr. Jean-François Laberge, the minister in charge of the French language in Quebec, who's a member of a Federalist Party, if that needs to be reminded, and he assumed a similar position, and he was saying that the whole Justin Trudeau government had to be held responsible because they were refusing to condemn such reprehensible words. And he also adds that Mr. Drouin goes against statistical and mathematical and scientific data. And he also says that he was defended and excused by the Prime Minister and ministers. It's really serious, and this is not the first time. And everyone who claimed to be advocates of French language or the Francophonie should pay attention, because one can think that, well, this is a point of view, these are some facts, but you're not really taking into account Francophones outside of Quebec. Mr. Trudeau was saying that people are attacking Mr. Drouin because he's a Franco-Ontarian and that people did not like Franco-Ontarians. So it's always trying to divide. That is the trap with official languages. It is as if there is a certain setup that was put in place, and We will provide little subsidies to institutions outside of Quebec, which make up 10% of Francophones in Canada. And where you have 90% of Francophones in Canada, well, there we're going to support English. That is the setup, and it simply does not work. And everyone acknowledges that French is on the decline in Quebec, in Manitoba, in Alberta, everywhere. So everyone ends up losing when we play these games. And if you look at Quebec's parliament that adopted a motion saying that the National Assembly reiterates that the decline of French in Quebec is a reality that is outlined by numerous statistical and linguistic indicators. And when you look at all the linguistic indicators, you see that maternal language, language used at home, language used at work, first language spoken, all of the indicators show that there's a decline, that French is in decline in Quebec and outside of Quebec. And the National Assembly condemns all insults and accusations towards the defenders of the only official language of Quebec, French, and demands the federal government to raise awareness amongst its representatives on these matters, including on platforms such as the Francophonie, where they are represented. So having a chair of the Canadian branch of the Francophonie who attacks and insults witnesses in a meeting because they bring to us statistical information saying that the underfunding of post-secondary institutions, Francophone institutions in Quebec, is a factor of anglicisation, well, I think it's not worthy of a chair of the Assemblée parlementaire de la Francophonie. So I really don't understand the position of the Liberals and the government. They are not budging from their position of defending this behavior, Mr. Chair. Even in the motion of the National Assembly of Quebec, you have provincial Liberals who voted in favor. I don't know if Mr. Drouin or the Liberals think that they are boogeymen separatists who are doing that, because it's not the case at all. So I think we have to set the record straight. We have to make sure that there's respect here. And Mr. Lacroix is not the first witness. It wasn't rather his first time appearing before this committee. It was his third time. And we had other witnesses who came here to defend French in Quebec. And while my colleagues weren't really paying attention, they were having side discussions. And when there's mention of English, well, he woke up and he jumped on the opportunity. So that doesn't make sense. We cannot tolerate this, and it's sending the wrong message. Witnesses or people from Quebec cannot be intimidated just because they're defending French. And the worst in all this is that in all of this situation where you have the Official Languages Act, Francophone institutions are not receiving the necessary level of funding, and provincial governments, almost all of the provinces outside of Quebec, are providing some level of funding. And in Quebec, you have the government of Quebec that is overfunding English language institutions. So, first of all, we have to stop trying to divide Quebecers and Francophones outside of Quebec and really send a strong message. So it has to be clear. We had Mr. Lambropoulos, Ms. Lambropoulos, who resigned for simply having said that, referred to the decline of French in air quotes. So it's really double standards that we're seeing here. We also had a leader of a party that was removed from the chamber because he used the word wacko, and then extremist as well. So I could have read Bukardiev's article if I wanted to thread in those waters. but I will save Mr. Drouin from the titles that were being used in that meeting. So the Liberals should make it clear, because they keep repeating that the government wants to defend French in Quebec. And then, well, I don't know how many times I asked the question, but no one answers. When you look at the facts, when you look at the Official Languages Action Plan, well, it's the same situation. From 1995 to 2024, you have 94% of the funding in Quebec that goes to enhance English and Anglophone education institutions, primary, secondary, post-secondary, and then you have Anglophone advocacy groups. But when you look at the data, when you look at the Official Languages Action Plan in detail, well, what I ended up with was 93.9% of the funding going to support English in Quebec. So for Quebec, this is unacceptable. We cannot really keep going like this. And the decline of French in Quebec is serious business. The government of English Canada is saying, well, we're supporting English in Quebec because it's minority in Quebec. But even the United Nations declared that Anglophones in Quebec can make claims, but not as a minority because they are part of the majority in Canada.
I think that for all those reasons, we have to pass this motion. It's nothing personal, but I think Monsieur Drouin has to resign. Thank you, Monsieur Beaulieu, Monsieur Dalton. It was just a procedural question. Thank you. Monsieur Godin. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you setting up this meeting for tonight. This way we'll be able to carry on with this topic and carry on to our next meeting. First of all, I would like to say that today is either Victoria Day or Patriots Day or the Day of Dollar, or the International Day for Bees. So everyone here can choose the day that they want. But as long as they're not being called full of shit, or just because it goes against the choice of the MP for Glengarry Prescott Russell. Mr. Chair, the letter that was sent last Friday was signed by 4 Conservative members in cooperation with the Bloc Québécois, which shows that the opposition is standing together so that we can go through this topic and then move on to something else that would be important for Francophones. You know, Mr. Chair, over the last 2 weeks, since May 6th, we've seen that the Liberals have taken out the strong measures. We can see by the number of Liberals MPs that are signed up to the APF to be able to be present at the next meeting. Obviously, on the Liberal side, they're ganging up together. So we have to warn the population. The Liberals are ready to do anything to save Soldier Drouin, Private Drouin, which shows disrespect to this committee. It is important to call to the member to order and to ask him, to ask the committee clearly to take position on how legitimate it is to have this member here. What happened on May 6th changed our perception here in committee. And Mr. Chair, that is the reason why I'm saying that this member shouldn't be sitting here anymore. And that is the reason why the opposition is standing together and asked for this 1064. It was already in the one in the previous one, but you've adjourned quickly. You interpreted things one way. We don't have the same interpretation as you. I've always respected your role as chair. We have to respect the institution, this committee, and it is clear that the member Drouin should not be sitting in this committee anymore. Mr. Chair, we can sit here until 9 tonight, and it is important that we can vote on this. So I will stop here and see what happens in the committee. But I do hope that the Liberals won't be filibustering and that we can go through this topic and start doing our full business on Thursday. For the next hands, I will talk about whether or not this motion is out of order. Because if we want a debate on this motion, tabled by M. Beaulieu, we'll go on with this debate. So, M. Serré, next. Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to see you tonight, you and all the members. The comments that we've heard tonight are troubling. The member is saying that we as government are not respecting the rules, the order. We were clear. Monsieur Drouin made a mistake. We've said it publicly. All of us. We've said that it was a mistake. And Monsieur Drouin, several times, I'd like to remind that, to remind the member of this committee and the public that Monsieur Drouin apologized. And Monsieur Beaulieu's interpretation that he expressed earlier is not exactly what happened, but Monsieur Drouin has been cleared. He apologized. And even when he apologized here in committee, he had apologized publicly before the committee, and he was sitting, I think, in this very chair. And the opposition didn't even give him the right to talk. They were asking for a point of order so that he couldn't apologize. And so we're seeing political games on the opposition side. And it's funny that M. Godin is talking about moving on to other things that are more important. I agree entirely with him. We should talk about immigration, the decline of French in Quebec and in Canada. There's issues with the education continuum. We have members here that weren't able to ask the questions to the minister. We could only talk about the motion that was tabled. So here we're playing with the truth, because not only did M. Drouin apologize, it was a small sin. He made a mistake. But does he need the Pope to forgive him? It doesn't make any sense. I don't know if he ever confesses, but he apologized. And we can spend a lot of time here with the opposition, and we could talk about a conservative member. Do you remember Mr. Thomas, who in committee told Minister Saint-Onge, point of order? Monsieur Godin, point of order. Sorry, someone was speaking in the room. I would like to ask for a point of order, because my colleague is not talking about the motion that was tabled. So I would like to ask him to stay on topic. It's important to stay focused on this motion so that we can move on to other things. He was right on topic with some side steps to support his argument. I have a long list of people who want to talk. Monsieur Serré, you can carry on. Thank you, Chair, and I understand why Monsieur Godin is upset because, of course, it's hard to take. Point of order. Point of order, Chair. Monsieur Godin? My colleague is pretending he knows my reaction and emotion, so I would like him to keep his words on topic and that he doesn't bother with my reactions because I don't think that his remarks are appropriate. Monsieur Godin, this is not a point of order. We're not going above what we would usually hear in this debate. If he did go over the limit, I would have asked the member to pace himself. But I think that we can let Monsieur Serré finish, just like we let you talk. Thank you, Chair. I completely agree. It's hard for Monsieur Godin to hear this because everything is relative here. Madame Thompson, and I'm sure you all remember, she was here in committee. She told the Minister for Heritage, la ministre Saint-Onge, not to speak French. Come on. In a parliamentary committee here in Ottawa, Madame Harder commented. And what did she do after? She apologized. So this is all linked to the discussion that we're having today. She apologized once. I think Monsieur Drouin apologized 5 times. It didn't go to the House, nowhere else. We didn't have waste of time like the 106 that we're doing tonight. We have rules here and studies that we need to make, but to carry out. But if we look at the motion, Monsieur Godin's motion tabled last Thursday when the minister was here. We asked the minister to appear at committee to talk about an important issue that has just been mentioned by the members, talking about underfunding. We had the minister here in the room to talk about post-secondary education. What do? They don't even ask a question about post-secondary education. Absolutely nothing. Not one. All they were talking about was Monsieur Drouin and his comments, for which he had just apologized. So you have to be careful when you're talking about disrespect and procedures. The motion that was tabled that had us lose a full hour with the minister, that was right here with us. And then another motion for the 1064 coming on the same topic. We're a parliamentary committee looking at different studies. We're not busy with throwing out members. This is out of order. It has nothing to do with our business. And if we look at the motion that is tabled today, that is basically the same motion that was tabled on Thursday when the minister was here. It's another 106 that we had a couple of days ago and then that we have again on the same topic. And Mr. Chair, the motion says A and B, that the chief government whip and member of the Liberal leadership team immediately remove MP Francis Drouin. A committee that does this doesn't have anything to do with procedures. Why are we even talking about this? I would love to talk about it if I look at my colleagues on the other side. There are some decisions that were made by your whip that I'm questioning, but I have no authority. I have no business telling the Conservative whip, the NDP whip, or the Bloc's whip what to do. I don't know what kind of water you've been drinking, but it has nothing to do with official languages. A committee cannot decide if a member can sit here, it's against the rules. If the Liberals can do it, well, then maybe we could table motion. I have a lot of names of Conservative members who've made mistakes in the past. Liberals too. The Bloc, the NDP, everyone has made mistakes. But the whip makes the decisions, not the committee. We are here to defend minority people everywhere in this country. And if we take letter B in this motion, that MP Francis Drouin resign as the chair of the Assemblée parlementaire de la Francophonie. Come on. Since when does a committee... I'm a member of Parlemerica, just like Monsieur Drouin is chair of the international section of the APF. There's not a committee here in this parliament that has the authority to reject this. There are members here that are not even member of the APF. How can we make a decision? It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand, Chair, what we're doing here on Monday night, the third meeting on the same topic, after the member apologized and that the government said, that I've said, members have said, that Monsieur Drouin made a mistake. But again, does he need to be forgiven by the Pope himself? So when we're looking at this motion, I'm not even at the center of the debate. I have articles here, several articles. And I'll wait for a lever. I have an article from Le Droit from 1970. Monsieur Trudeau asked a Liberal MP who was speaking French to go to Cégep. To promote the French language. And I will quote here, it says, the member MP Serré is talking about Canadian unity. We're not in the 50s, it's important. And here, without reading the article, Monsieur Serré explained, talked to students here in Ottawa, at the Franco-Ontarian Youth Association. Monsieur Serré explained to his public that language right for Franco-Ontarian would be threatened by Quebec's independence. That's the story, Monsieur Beaulieu. That is what my dad said. He believes that the government's attitude will not be the same. Point of order. Monsieur Beaulieu, I think that Monsieur Serré is misleading us. He said that the member was in Cégep, but there's no Cégep here in Ontario. We can't criticize the comments that are being made. So when it comes to whether or not the Quebec government is funding Anglophone institutions too much or not enough, that's another topic. No one criticized what you said, whether it was positive or negative. You made your comments on the motion. Now it's Monsieur Serré's turn. And what you're bringing up is not a point of order. If you want to give us scientific data about how wrong Monsieur Serré is, that's one thing, but that's not a point of order. I asked to be put on the list earlier. Did you put me on the list? Yes. I told you earlier that when I'll be done with Madame Ashton, then I will say whether or not the motion is in order. The motion that you've tabled. So we'll end with Madame Ashton, and then I will go for another round. But I want to hear everyone, like I have given you the opportunity, Monsieur Dalton, who decided not to speak. We'll end this round with Madame Ashton, and then we'll see. There are two of us here putting names down on the list. Monsieur Serry, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that Monsieur Beaulieu is clarifying the comment on Cégep. Monsieur Trudeau asked the liberal MPs to go to Quebec in Cégeps to talk about how important the French language is. My father was one of those members, and he always tells me stories about when he was in Cégep. A lot of comments were made because he spoke excellent French, but was from Ontario. My great-grandparents came to Ontario in 1870. Monsieur Godin, you don't have the floor yet. I've explained it earlier. Everyone around the table, I think, has understood what I said. I told you, you say point of order, you stop there, we let the person who's speaking finish their sentence, and then you can speak. I am being fair with everyone, and I've told everyone, if we don't respect this, I will see it as disorder. It's not for you, it's not for me, not for you, Mr. Godin, but for the interpreters. I would like, as the chair, not to have to explain again why it is important not to speak one over the other, because it is what injures the ears of our interpreters. I hope that as a committee I will not have to explain this again. Monsieur Godin, now you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, there's an article. I don't have the number of the article of the standing orders. We got to remain on topic. Here we're talking about Mr. Serry's father. We're not on topic. Can we come back to the topic, please? The topic at hand. You're right, Monsieur Godin. It is a point of order, but Monsieur Serry is speaking to the motion, and it may become information that may become relevant. He gives parallel examples, so I can only listen to what Mr. Serry is saying, just as Mr. Beaulieu was doing so a bit earlier on. It was relevant. He had different examples. Mr. Beaulieu was talking about the financing of post-secondary education by the provincial government. Talked about that, then came back to the motion at hand. It's hard for me to evaluate exactly how close we are. Well, thank you for thanking me, Mr. Godin, but we'll give the floor to Mr. Serry. And when I will assess that we're too far from the main motion, I will prevent them from speaking. I give a wide berth, and I explained this earlier. I'll give you 1 strike, 2 strikes, but 3 strikes, you're out. All right, Mr. Serry, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everything is relative, as I was saying, because here the whip decides when the MPs will travel, what committees they will sit on. So basically, the whips asked my father to go to the Quebec Cégeps and speak to the students there. And my dad always tells me the same story. He was in Cégeps, and my dad was told many times that he was a liar, that he was a traitor, because he couldn't speak such good French, even if, since he came from Ontario. He heard that back in the 1970s. So when we're talking about history, everything is relative. Monsieur Godin, Monsieur Généreux, well, you guys are lucky. You had the chance to live your life in French more than us, more than me living in Ontario, Northern Ontario, more than my ancestors. But we remain true to our language and to our culture. We have secondary schools, elementary schools. We have colleges, and now, as well, we have a university. So here, when we're talking about the whip, the motion, here, in the motion, we're talking about removing a member. It's not even in relation to our committee. This is an abuse of power by the committee. And I believe this motion is therefore out of order. And that's why Monsieur Beaulieu and Monsieur Godin are next to one another, because they can whisper to one another and define their strategy. But here we're talking about Francophones who live outside of Quebec. And sometimes it's hard for the members across to understand that. And I'm jealous of them to have had the chance to work in French all their lives, which is a chance I wasn't afforded. We can certainly talk about the legal challenge. I'm also sitting on the Heritage Committee, and it's kind of hard on that committee because the Conservatives don't want this legal challenge to pass. In fact, they've cancelled the program twice when they were in power, but that program helped us as Francophones. It helped our schools. Mr. Godin's father was also involved. He was involved in the Montfort case, in helping elementary schools. We're talking about francophonie outside of Quebec, and that's why everything is relative. Earlier, Mr. Beaulieu was saying, oh, well, we need to work together, and I fully agree. I fully agree, Mario. It's great that the Bloc has a thought for francophones outside of Quebec. Oh, you can laugh, but you say that, you said comments that were a bit insulting. 10% of francophones outside of Quebec, they don't really need help. That's wasted money. I hope that's not what you meant. Just a second, Mr. Serré. I'd like to remind the committee that all interventions must be made through the chair, which will help alleviate the tension, I think. I certainly don't want our committee to stoke any tensions. And Mr. Serré, I'll bring you back to the main motion that was tabled by Mr. Beaulieu. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I will end on what I was saying a bit earlier on. There are a huge amount of precedents as well, like Natural Resources Committee. I invite Canadians to take 5 minutes out of their day and to listen to a committee meeting of the Natural Resources Committee where people are screaming and people must vote with a thumbs up, with a thumbs down. And despite that, there was no repercussions for the Conservatives. So we have this motion with those two elements that I mentioned, the whips and the Assemblée des parlementaires, that is outside of the purview of the committee, as I mentioned. And as the MP said earlier, we have more important things to take care of. And I hope that when we meet next, we will go to our to the most important points. Remember what they said last week. We need to think about important things for our linguistic communities. There are huge needs everywhere in Canada, including Quebec, to reverse the decline of French. The Assemblée de la Francophonie d'Ontario was very clear. They asked the committee to work together to find a solution. We're being sent motions that are out of order, that are out of context, and it's hard not to take things personally when one sees this. And I think it's important to see what is important to us as a committee, what is important to Canadians. And Mr. Beaulieu, I could quote at length many other articles like the one I just did. I'm not even talking about all the cuts that the Conservatives want to put in effect at CBC Radio-Canada, which would have a huge impact on francophones. Anything to add, Mr. Serré? No, nothing to add. Mr. Godin? I'm quoting from the standing orders, Mr. Chair. We need to broach the main topic while we're here from 7 to 9, so I would like my colleague to speak to the topic. Mr. Serré, anything to add? No, I will simply end by saying that it's clear, and I understand Monsieur Godin's intervention. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that the Conservatives wants to cut services at Radio-Canada CBC across the country. All right, Mr. Serré, let's come back to the main motion. This is strike two. Is your intervention complete? No? Mr. Godin, no, you're fine. Mr. Drouin, then Mr. Sanson. Mr. Drouin, go ahead. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Since we're talking about myself, I'd like to do it for a sixth time and look at my colleagues in the eyes and say that I sincerely apologize to the witnesses. It never happened in 8 years. Sometimes it happens that one loses patience, but what happened on May 6th had never happened in the previous 8 years. That being said, I'll invite colleagues to assess the behavior of their own colleagues in other committees or even in the House. For example, I know that the leader of the Conservatives called a mayor incompetent, but called the mayors of the two biggest Francophone municipalities, not only in Quebec but in North America, of incompetent. And what they said? What did the other party say after the leader said that? Nothing. Nothing. So with all due respect, Mr. Chair, this is just petty politics. They don't want me to apologize. This is just petty politics. And I've been in politics for long enough to know this. And I understand, on the other side of the aisle, they're frustrated. And it's nothing personal. I get that as well. But the Bloc started a disinformation campaign in my by saying that I did not support the francophonie. The deputy whip said the MP for Glengarry Prescott Russell took his 15 minutes of fame to deny the decline of French. Did I really pretend that French was not declining? Did I really say that publicly? I invite my colleagues to read the record. And M. Beaulieu used words such as instrumentalize. And when he says such words, I'm curious. Because, well, he said that on February 7th, 2023. The member for La Prairie, House Leader, and I'm sure the MP will recognize himself. I know exactly what he's talking about. It's his writing. When one talks about instrumentalize our various battles, who's trying to divide Francophones in the chamber? Who's trying to divide communities who have a different way to defend their language and culture? The Liberal member for Glengarry Prescott Russell, it's Monsieur Terrien, he said, the smoke show of my colleagues is shameful. He doesn't have a monopoly on the linguistic policy of Canada. Did Monsieur Beaulieu really believe I was not defending Bill 96 in Quebec and the French language charter in Quebec when his House leader said that? Yesterday, the Franco-Ontarian member had the courage to denounce the smokescreen of his colleagues and the disinformation being propagated on Bill 101. I hope that my honourable colleague was not believing that I was denying that French is declining in Canada. But that's not the extent of it, Mr. Chair. Once again, I spoke about the insult CEO, Pierre Poilievre, who insulted two Francophone mayors, and there was no reaction across the aisle from the official opposition. No reaction at all. And now that party is asking me to withdraw from this committee? I will quote once again my dear colleague, for whom I have tremendous respect, the member for Portneuf-Cartier. It's not because it's legal that it's moral. But I think I understand why this is the topic that they want to speak about tonight. I understand that there's a lot of Conservative MPs who charged some fees to go to political conventions. I mean, that's not a topic at hand today, but we'll have the chance to talk about this later, I'm sure. Earlier, I apologize, and as my mom always taught me, there are only two perfect people in the universe, my mother and God. And I remember my father. His name is Yves Drouin, and I'm the proud son of Yves Drouin because he's a proud founding member of l'Association des Municipalités Francophones de l'Ontario. He worked with Jean-Marc Lalonde, with Gisèle Lalonde, who fought tremendously for Montfort. And this brings me to the question, who is humble and can take part in this committee? What I said was out of order. I recognize it. I apologized for sixth time tonight. It did not foster a positive and respectful environment to witnesses. I understand that. I apologize. I respect that. It's not something I usually do. But I believe that actions and that my actions speak louder than my words, than my comments, and speak louder to the fact that I was in an argument with someone and I was disrespectful. The Francophone community outside of Quebec spoke about the fight of the rights holders. And we knew that was important because asking a question in the long-form census was a question that would help the courts recognize the importance of those right owners. And now it's on the short form, and that means that every Francophone speaker fighting for school can legally table a census number of the amount of Francophones living outside of Quebec so that they have access to schools. But you know what? It's not all the Francophone communities who have access to that. And how will they be helped if they don't have the funds? They will go with the legal challenge program. But that's the program that the Conservatives members wants to abolish. And I hope that the members across sitting on this committee will be bold enough to tell Mr. Poilievre, you can't go ahead with that cut, because that program since the 90s, but especially back in 1998, when there was a Francophone community that said to Mike Harris, to the Conservative Ontario government, no, Mr. Harris, you can't close the only Francophone hospital in Ontario. And I benefited from this 19 years later, because when I had a child, well, when I'm not the one who had the child, of course, I'd like to thank my wife, but when I became a father, it was in a French hospital and I could speak to Francophones working in that hospital. Why? Because people that came before me fought for French language in Ontario. I was called an anti-Francophone. Now let's talk about bilingual judges. Mona Fortier is here. She's sitting right next. She's sitting at this table. Even when my own government was against, we stood up and we told our party we disagreed. And now we're proud for this to be part of C-13. We stood up for our rights even when our own government told us that that bill would not be supported at that time. Well, thankfully, Francophones from outside Quebec, Franco-Ontarians, I'd like to thank Mr. Sanson as well, and Ms. Koutrakis. You weren't there back then, but we all fought for this back in the day. Once again, I'm being asked to apologize because I'm told I should not sit on this committee. The Bloc Québécois is even questioning my commitment to francophonie, and that is unacceptable to me because they're calling in question my integrity. But that's, as I said, that's petty politics, and I get that. When we had the debate on the French language university in Ontario, I had once again spoke in a way that put me at odds with some people in my community. I said that I don't think that my government should fund that university 100%. Why? Because I didn't want provinces to be able to not fund our post-secondary institutions. Now, I'm not the only one responsible for this, but now we have an 8-year deal as opposed to a 4-year deal. We signed an 8-year deal thanks to this. 2 years ago, we would have fought for funding at the provincial level for this. And I didn't do this because I'm a liberal or a conservative or an NDP or a Bloc Québécois member. I did this because I'm a Franco-Ontarian. The color I wear is the color of Franco-Ontarians, not the color of any party. Mr. Chair, I would also like to speak about the fact that I'm being asked to apologize, and yet Well, there's a Francophone community in Canada that feels hurt. That's what they said. They feel hurt. Hurt by what the Bloc Québécois leader said. And with all due respect to Mr. Beaulieu and to the member for La Prairie, I've yet to hear him ask his leader to apologize for what his leader said. It's not up to me to judge. And, you know, for 6 years, I did not comment on goings-on in Quebec. And I will stick to that. But why is a member asking for such apologies from me, but not from his leader? Is a Francophone community more important than another Francophone community? The answer to that is no. The Quebec nation is just as important as a Franco-Ontarian community, and that community is just as important as a Franco-Albertan community. And of course, Mr. Chair, one should never forget Acadians, of course. And I'm looking at my friend, Mr. Sanson, as well, the Acadian communities, who, of course, borne a lot of injustices in the past. And here we are. Here we are, Mr. Chair. And if I may speak on behalf of the Francophone communities outside of Quebec, I'll say something positive. I'll say something positive about the Bloc Québécois. I am grateful for their efforts in defending Francophones outside of Quebec. However, anytime their collaborators or their columnists call us dead ducks or warm corpses or a community under artificial breathing rather, or what we heard recently, the Cajuns who can barely speak French, anytime that such a columnist says that in the papers, the Bloc doesn't say anything. And that's my question. Why doesn't the Bloc say anything? Do they really want to unify all these Francophone communities? Well, if that's what they do, we need to bring together all Francophones who may not share the same views, but all those people who have a common interest in defending the French language.
That's something I say very often. I don't have the luxury of waking up in French. My spouse is Anglophone and love has no language, but every morning I choose personally to speak French to my son, and she also agrees with our decision of sending him to a Francophone institution, and everything is working beautifully. I live in a minority context in my community. The beauty is that there are more and more Francophones in our community, but still, because we don't have the only option of relying on Francophone immigration. So once again, Mr. Chair, I've apologized now 6 times, and if you want to move a motion asking me to walk bare feet all the way to the Vatican, then I'm all for it. But saying that I do not defend the Francophonie, I have a problem with that. It's attacking my integrity, and not just that, the integrity of all those who came before me as Douans. And I arrived on l'île d'Orléans in 1638. That lineage, rather. So some MPs, some members on the other side may not like listening to long speeches. But just a reminder that we all make mistakes. I made a mistake. I recognized it on my own. Mr. Chair, I withdrew my remarks in less than half a second. But this was never regular behavior on my part. If we take the example of Ms. Thomas on the Official Languages Committee, a standing committee on official languages, who constantly insults witnesses, including Minister Saint-Onge. My colleague Mr. Serre mentioned that, or other MPs. We also had the leader of the Conservative Party who at four separate occasions was asked to withdraw his remarks by the Speaker of the House and did not do it. So who's lacking respect, rather, in our democratic institutions? So on that, Mr. Chair, I'm not going to